A small plane, 2 men, and a mission that was not only life-threatening but seems absolutely impossible even today. The strange dream of a Las Vegas hotel owner to keep an airplane in the air not just for hours or days but for months without touching the ground. Here, it wasn't just a matter of fuel. This is a story of sleep deprivation, the cold of December, and maintaining a delicate balance between life and death. But the question is, did these 2 pilots really manage to break this seemingly impossible record, or did their plane disappear forever into the blue sky? A strange incident in history that has now been lost somewhere in the pages of books. Welcome once again to a video from Jam TV. Viewers, in 1956, a man named Warren Bailey opened a hotel in Las Vegas that was quite different from the city's other big casinos and hotels because it attracted simple, rural folks. This hotel called Hacienda was not very expensive, and that was the reason why ordinary people liked to go there. But since the profits were quite low, Warren Bailey was always coming up with new ideas to promote his hotel. One day, his friend Bob Tim, who was an army pilot, suggested to him that if a world record could be broken, it could bring a lot of publicity to the hacienda. He was referring to flying a plane that would stay in the air not just for days, but for months without touching the ground. Warren really liked this idea, but would it actually be able to bring publicity to the hotel or not? And above all, how would this even be possible? Here, it's important to understand that when the airplane was first invented, its flight time used to be recorded in seconds. For pilots and mechanics, the most important thing was how long an airplane could stay in the air. With time, airplanes became more advanced and so did their flight times. And then a point came when everything depended on the fuel tank. In other words, the bigger the fuel tank, the longer the flight time. In 1923, the US Army solved this problem by refueling one plane from another while still in the air. After that, the first endurance flight record was immediately broken. The first world record was set by a DH-4B plane, which refueled in the air 9 times and flew continuously for 37 hours. After that, a new trend of breaking this world record began. America had caught the fever of endurance flights, and in 1929 alone, this record was broken 5 times. But by the time Bob Tim was giving this idea to Warren, the craze for this world record had faded considerably, because now it was no longer about the limits of the aircraft's engine or fuel tank, but about testing the physical limits of the human body. Bob Tim was talking about breaking a world record that had been set in 1949 by 2 Navy pilots who kept an Aeronca sedan aircraft in the air for 46 days, and their purpose was highly publicized in the media. Warren Bailey, the owner of the hacienda, thought this idea would be great for promoting his hotel, and he requested Bob Tim himself to carry out this mission since, after all, Bob Tim was a well-known World War II pilot. Tim first went to McCarran Field Airport. There, he bought a Cessna 172 aircraft and also hired a mechanic so that the plane could be modified for the endurance flight. First, they removed the co-pilot's seat because if Tim had to stay in the air for more than a month, he would definitely need a co-pilot, and both pilots would fly the plane in shifts. While one pilot handled the controls, the other would sleep on a foam pad placed where the co-pilot's seat used to be. They also removed the bench from the back row, replacing it with just an 8 square foot storage area to keep essential items, and a small sink was installed in one corner of the cabin so that occasionally a sponge bath could somehow be taken in the 4-foot-high cabin. After that, they also installed a 95-gallon belly tank so that in addition to the plane's wings, there would be an extra fuel tank as well. An electric winch was also installed in this belly tank to fill it with fuel during the flight, which would be able to pull the fuel pipe up. They removed the co-pilot's door and replaced it with a folding door, which would provide easy access to the belly tank's fuel port. Nowadays, hanging from a flying plane is something you only see in movies, but back then it was a common thing. In fact, even up until the 1950s, aerial stuntmen performed many scenes where, during flight, they had to move from one plane to another. To make refueling at least a little less dangerous, a small foldable platform was built outside the co-pilot's door so that someone could stand on it and connect the pipe to the belly tank's port. This platform was the only place on the plane where it was possible to stand upright. Otherwise, inside the Cessna 172 there was only enough space to sit or lie down. They also made several changes to the plane's engine and wrote Hacienda in large letters on the outside of the plane, which was the main purpose of this entire mission. Now it was time to conduct test flights. The test flights began in the summer of 1958, but problems started arising one after another. The co-pilot Tim had initially hired didn't get along with him. During the test flights, the two would often argue with each other over one thing or another. The first test flight failed, the second one also failed, and during the third, the argument between the two escalated so much that Tim fired the co-pilot. The problem was with the plane's engine exhaust valve, which kept overheating. They had launched the mission 3 times, but each attempt ended in complete failure. On top of that, while they were conducting their failed test flights in an attempt to set a new world record, at the very same time, pilots Jim Heth and Bill Burkhardt over Dallas had already succeeded in setting a new world record by staying airborne for 50 days in the same Cessna 172 aircraft. By December, Tim had resolved all the issues with the aircraft, and finally, on December 4th, 1958, the Hacienda took off from McCarran Field for its 4th attempt. At that time, officials from the International Federation of Automobiles, or FAI, were also present there, keeping an eye on the mission. To avoid accusations of fraud, Tim and his new co-pilot John Cook took off and then returned to the runway so that a chase car could apply a special white paint to the plane's tire. If they tried to secretly land somewhere, the white paint would come off and the world record would not be counted. After 12 hours, when it was time for the first refueling, the two flew over a predetermined road where a refueling truck was already waiting. As soon as the plane lined up with the road, the truck driver floored the accelerator. At this point, the plane had to fly at its minimum speed, which was 100 kilometers per hour, because the truck couldn't go any faster than that. When the Hacienda was just 20 feet above the truck and both were aligned, the co-pilot dropped the winch down. The workers in the truck attached the pipe to this winch, and then the winch was pulled up. This pipe was connected to the belly tank's port, and then the truck was signaled to turn on the fuel pump. For the next 3 minutes, the Hacienda and the truck moved side by side. During this time, even the slightest mistake or any change in speed by either one would have meant only one thing: death. When the belly tank was full, the co-pilot removed the pipe and threw it back down, and then they took off into the sky again for another 12 hours. If they wanted to break the 50-day world record, they would have to repeat this process at least 100 times. For the first few days, Tim and Cook kept flying over Las Vegas so that if there was any problem with the plane, the landing strip would be close by. But once everything seemed fine, they also started spending a lot of time flying over the deserted fields of California. At higher altitudes, fuel efficiency improves, but the temperature also drops to freezing, and due to the modifications in the Hacienda's doors, its insulation was no longer good. So, to avoid the cold, they decided to fly closer to the ground. At lower altitudes, the views are better, but at night, mountains and clouds can prove to be deadly. By now, both pilots had become good friends while spending time together. In their free time, they would read books, exercise, and spend time chatting. Taking advantage of refueling twice a day, they would not only pull up fuel but also other necessary items, such as water containers, engine oil, and food prepared by the chefs at Hacienda. At this point, you might also be wondering where all the food they ate actually went. In other words, where did they go to the toilet? They had kept a folding camp toilet seat in the plane with a waste bag attached underneath. They would actually empty these plastic bags filled with waste over the deserted fields of California. They never revealed this themselves, but after the co-pilot passed away, his wife shared this information. Now Tim and Cook had spent 36 days in the air. They even spent their New Year's Eve in the plane, but signs of fatigue and stress were starting to show. Both of them were facing a lot of discomfort in the cramped plane cabin. They couldn't even sleep properly because of the noise from the plane's engine. One night, Tim fell asleep while sitting at the controls, and this happened just a few minutes before the co-pilot's shift was supposed to start. Amazingly, Tim didn't wake up for the next hour, and the plane kept flying straight solely on autopilot. When Tim woke up, the plane was flying at a low altitude inside a canyon in an unfamiliar place. If Tim hadn't woken up for a few more minutes, the plane would have crashed into a mountain because the autopilot's job was only to keep the plane straight, not to avoid obstacles. On January 12th, that is, on day 39, a serious problem occurred in the plane. The plane's generator failed. This meant that now the radio, lights, heater, and the system to pump fuel from the belly tank to the wings would no longer work. The ground crew sent up a small wind turbine, but it could only generate enough electricity to run the radio. For the remaining days, the fuel had to be pumped manually by hand. Because there were no lights, the refueling process at night became very difficult, especially when there was a new moon. They solved this problem by tying a flashlight to the winch so that the ground crew could see where to attach the pipe, and the second truck with a searchlight was driven 300 feet ahead of the refueling truck. Now the problems started increasing day by day. The plane's fuel gauge broke down, the tachometer failed, and carbon started to build up in the engine. As the time to break the record approached on January 23rd, Hacienda finally started getting the publicity that its owner, Bell, had been hoping for. Bell had a schedule made for flying over every major city and published it in the newspapers so that people could see the plane and cover this historic moment. Once, he even sent an entire separate plane filled with photographers which flew alongside the Hacienda and managed to capture some memorable photos. To make this moment even more spectacular, co-pilot Cook pretended to step out of the plane to clean the windscreen. The newspapers published this photo and the entire country started paying attention to this historic flight. On January 23rd at 3:52 p.m., the Hacienda broke the 50-day record it had set. But considering all the hard work and difficulties they had endured to break this record, Tim and Cook decided that they would not land just yet. They chose to keep going for as long as possible, and in this way they spent another 14 days in the air. Eventually, the plane was no longer capable of flying any further. On February 7, 1959, after staying in the air for a total of 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 5 seconds, they finally requested permission to land from the McCarran Field Control Tower and brought the plane down. At the time of landing, a huge crowd of the press had gathered, and people from all over the country had come to the airport to witness this historic moment. This included supporters, record officials, journalists, Tim's wife and children, and the entire staff of the Hacienda Hotel. Tim and Cook were in such bad shape that they weren't even able to get out of the plane on their own. Officials also confirmed that the white tire paint was completely intact. This meant that the plane had truly stayed in the air for 64 days without landing. In 2015, the FAI officially discontinued piloted endurance records because the risk to human life was increasing. This means that Tim and Cook's world record will now remain unbreakable forever. The Cessna 172, in which this world record was set, is still hanging in the baggage claim area of Terminal 1 at McCarran International Airport, telling its story to people even today. We hope you will also like and share this video from Zem TV wholeheartedly. Thank you so much for your loving comments. See you in the next amazing video.